So for the last 3 days of class before spring break, we're going to work on writing the story called What Happened to Mr. Functions. And the idea is that we're going to talk about writing a story that matches a graph of a transformed Mr. Functions. So the idea is that Mrs. Functions came home to find her husband, Mr. Functions, f of x, not looking like himself, can't talk, he's so confused. And we have to write a story saying, what happened to Mr. Functions? We're going to interrogate Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, Mr. D, Mr. Absolute Value. And I'll show you a little example in a minute. You're going to do it as a police detective interrogating these witnesses, these suspects. And if you want to give names to these people, Mr. A could be Mr. Adams, Mr. B could be Miss Black, or so on and so forth. You can decide. Just make sure I understand what they're going to stand for, because you should know what A, B, C, D, and absolute value do to a graph. And you can do a little Q&A between them. Obviously, these suspects are not going to willingly just give up the information. You might have to pry it out of them a little bit. So when you interrogate these 5 suspects, at least 3 out of the 5 must be guilty. We're going to start off with x squared as being the parent graph of Mr. Functions, and then we're going to have a transform graph, and we're going to use GeoGebra.org to help us do that. In fact, let's go to do that right now. So here I am. I'm going to go to GeoGebra.org, and I'm going to click on the graphing calculator because that's what I want to do. And you notice when you get the graphing calculator, you're going to get this grid. You're going to have where you can put equations on the side. On the bottom left, you have this little keyboard to help you do some of the equations. So we're just going to use x squared, so you can just go x squared. You don't have to hit enter or anything. You can just go x squared and then hit enter, and it automatically calls it f of x. If you want to click on the graph, you could change its color. I like blue. You want to make the line thicker. That's good. If you want to put a label on it, you could go to settings, and its name we could call f of x. Notice when you hit parentheses, you get both open and closed parentheses, and you can show label. And you want to put a caption on it. Oop. Let's see if it'll work. Oh, I guess it won't let me do it, but you could just call it F, and there it's there. And this is the original graph, and you see our keyboard. I'm going to get rid of my keyboard. I don't need to see it. And we're going to have to put this into our document, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you're going to create a document. You could do it in Microsoft Word if you want to, because you're going to submit it to the portal, or you could just do a Google Doc. Pull up a new Google Doc. And let's see, I'm going to title it What Happened to Mr. Functions. And I'm going to do by me. And the idea is, you want to maybe put it in bold. You might want to center it. Maybe underline it, and so on and so forth. So when you do this writing project, you could do it by yourself if you choose to, or you could do it in a group of 2. Please make sure you put your names on this top underneath the title, and I'm going to put in the original function. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to go back to my graph, and you can drag this graph. You don't have to see the whole underneath the x-axis, and you have to do a screen capture of this. I use a snipping tool on the PC. You do what you think is best for you, but I do like this little snipping feature on the PC, and I can just put this right into my document. And I probably have to shrink it up a little bit. It's way too big. Then I can move it around and do whatever. Okay. So after I insert the original Mr. Functions into my document, I'm going to do the transfer Mr. Functions. So I'm going to go back to my GeoGebra. And this is what I really like about GeoGebra. So in the second line of input, I don't have to type in a new equation. I could just use f. Let's say I'm going to do -2 f parentheses x minus 3, and outside of parentheses I'm going to do a +5, and it's going to do all that for me. And you can see what I've typed into the screen here and what the new equation is going to be here, and there it is. And I can see now the red. I don't want to see both graphs. I just really want to see this graph, and if I want, I can do a screen capture of this by doing the same thing. Remember, at least 3 out of the 5 must be guilty. So you have to have at least 3 transformations. Now, I want you to write your own story. I want you to think about your own transformations, because you have to write a story that matches what you do. So this is me capturing everything. I'm going to go back to my document. I'm going to put it in the document. I'm going to, it's a little bit too big to fit in. Shrink it up a little bit. And there is the transform Mr. Functions. Again, he's too big. But there you go. He's there like that. So part of the things that you must do, you must have the original Mr. Functions in the graph. The original Mr. Function must be x squared, and then your transform Mr. Functions with at least 3 transformations between a, b, c, d, and absolute value must be in the graph. You might make it more complicated. That's up to you. But you must match a story to whatever your graph is. So let's talk about your story. As you see, the rubrics here, 30 points. 1 point for the original graph, 1 point for the transform graph. You have to interrogate all five suspects, 2 points apiece for 10. Evidence of 3 guilty actions, 2 points apiece worth 6. A conclusion. Your conclusion must have what happened to Mr. Functions and in what order. The order does matter on how things are done, the transformations. And maybe what happened to the guilty parties as far as a consequence or this and that. And the last part is really subjective to me as how creative you are. This does not have to be super long, but you could see on my next page, I gave you an example of what I'm looking for. Here's my original. Here's my transform Mr. Functions. I have a lot going on there. I wrote the story. The first thing he interviewed was Mr. Absolute Value, and I gave him a little funny little accent. And I did this whole story, and you can read it yourself. This is not the whole story. This is just part of the story. So if I wanted to, I could take part of my story. I'm going to copy it. And when I go back to my document, I could put it into here. And there we go. There's the start of my story. I would say 1 page for the original graphs and probably about a 2 to 3 page story. Please be creative. If you want to be funny, be appropriate. Do whatever you want that's within the lines. Make sure you submit it to the portal and or share it with me. I'd rather you submit it on the portal. And it's worth 30 points, and it's a really easy topic. Just ask other people who've had functions. But this is what we're going to do for the last 3 days of class before break.